Hello and welcome to another candidate conversation of the 2012 election season. This civic media program is produced at the WCKN student-run cable television studio on the ground floor of the Student Center of Clarkson University. This series of voter education programs is a partnership production of Clarkson's Communication and Media Department, St. Lawrence County chapter of the American Association of University Women, and the St. Lawrence County League of Women Voters. Production crew for this series are all Clarkson University students. My name is Bill Wimmer. I'm a student at Clarkson and managing editor of the Clarkson Integrator. Today we speak with Congressman Bill Owens, Democratic candidate for the 21st Congressional District of New York. Joining us is local AAUW member Ann Carville and Liam Hunt of the LWV. Welcome to both of you, and Congressman Owens, welcome to Potsdam.
Thank you.
Congressman Owens, why do you deserve re-election to Congress? And if re-elected, what will be your top priorities?
Well, let me start by telling you what my top priority is, because I think it answers the question of why I should be reelected. I think that from my perspective, the most important issue that we're facing, other than sort of the classic jobs economy issue, is really the bipartisanship question. Our ability to get along and work together. I talk about that. I'm somebody who actually votes about 35% of the time with the other side of the aisle. When we did the recent Farm Bill, one of the things we did to try and establish bipartisanship was I talked to Chris Gibson, who's a congressman to the south of me, and to Peter Welch from Vermont. And as you can imagine, there's some differences in ideology between Peter and Chris Gibson. I tend to be a little more in the middle. And what we did when we voted on amendments to the bill, Gibson and I voted 19 out of 20 times together, and Welch voted with us 15 out of 20 times together. That was something which made a big impression on the chair of the committee and also on the ranking member. And they came up to the three of us on the floor the next day and said, "We saw what you did, we understand the message you were delivering." Because there was political risk to each of us in voting with the other. Sometimes just the mere fact of voting with one another has political risk associated with it. That's the message we wanted to get across. That's why I think I should be reelected.
Okay. Mr. Wimmer?
I'd like to talk a little bit about student issues. So, as you may or may not be aware, college costs in America are extraordinarily high compared to the rest of the world. Europe, for example. And they look to only be going up in the near future. I know students of mine who are graduating with $100,000 or more in student loans, which is the equivalent of buying a house and a car and using neither. They're graduating from college into a broken job market with horribly high unemployment rates, and if they decide they want to, delay going into this job market and pursue a master's or a doctorate's degree, they face even higher loans and then follow that up with a risk of underemployment. Even when they get out of school, if they do manage to get a job, following graduation, they have to pay back the loans without any exception whatsoever. Bankruptcy is one of the only things that student loans will not be replaced by. So I was wondering what you thought about what you think Congress should be able to do about this situation.
Well, first let me tell you that I have 3 children of my own who I've educated, so I am very familiar with the cost of college and graduate school educations. Clearly, that is a huge issue, not just for you who are graduating, but it's a huge issue for the country. As you know, you wouldn't remember, but right after World War II, we instituted the GI Bill. That was one of the periods of greatest economic and intellectual growth that we've had in this country. We've sort of lost our way, I think, a great deal on the education path. I think we do need to get back to working to support students. One of the things that I've been kicking around with a few members of Congress is the idea of various types of community service, which would allow for the reduction in the student debt, whether that's teaching, whether that's being involved in another program, whether that's joining the military, whatever it might be. Those are some kinds of things we need to think about creatively as ways to accomplish that. I'm a strong supporter of Pell Grants. I spent about 5 years on the Plattsburgh State College Council, and I was the attorney for Paul Smith's College for 25 years. So I have some background in higher education, understand some of the issues.
Excellent, thank you.
I'd like to just follow up on that. We'll come back to healthcare in general later on, but here's another possibility is to link loans for medical school specifically to a certain period of service as general practitioners in disadvantaged areas and so forth. Might not this be a way to alleviate the fairly serious shortage we have in terms of primary care physicians and physician's assistants?
There's no doubt that that's something we can look at. There are programs currently in place that do that for underserved areas. One of my nieces is now involved in that program, having recently graduated from medical school. She served a couple of years in New Mexico in an underserved area for Native Americans. So those programs exist. The question
but they certainly could be expanded.
But they could be expanded, and we could focus on them more. I think that is very important.
Okay, Representative Owens, I have a question on education. It's been said that our faltering education system may be the most important long-term threat to America's economy. Mark Tucker from the National Center on Education and the Economy has stated that the reform agenda in the United States, such as No Child Left Behind, Race to the Top, APPR, that they center around identifying the worst teachers and getting rid of them. He said, "A country cannot fire its way to a first-rate teaching force. Countries with top-performing schools, like Finland, Japan, New Zealand, Singapore, and others, realize that without first-class teachers, there will be no first-class schools. Do you believe that it is in our country's economic interest to spend more federal dollars creating schools of education that are highly competitive and that produce teachers who are paid as well as lawyers and engineers?"
Clearly, I think if you do any economic analysis or you have any experience in economic development, you know that one of the major legs of the stool that a company looks at is what does the workforce look like, what does the education in the community look like. They're interested in the people who they want to employ, but they're also interested in where their kids are going to go to school and what kind of education they're going to receive. So I do think we need to be very heavily focused on education. You know, as you look around at what we're doing, unfortunately, a lot of the conversation is to the negative, not to the positive. We're talking about, if you will, cutting teachers, not how to make them better performers. And we need to focus on that. Many of the people in my family are teachers or retired teachers. And I think that we've lost our way, but this is a very global attitude that's evolved in the United States, where we are much in a negative mood as opposed to thinking about how to solve the problems and move forward. You know, when you talk about No Child Left Behind, conversation I had early on with a group of teachers who came in to see me right after I was elected, I asked them, you know, how do you deal with the classroom of 20 that have 6 kids who get no support at home? So their homework isn't done, they don't go home to an environment where they're being helped or maybe even where education is valued. And those 6 kids are counted against those teachers when you do the evaluation. To me, there's a serious issue with that, and we need to reform these programs so that we're focused on helping teachers get better, not necessarily on looking for the negative.
Thank you.
You mentioned the sort of the negativity that surrounds this whole debate, and one aspect of that, of course, is the relationship between teachers' unions and some politicians and, frankly, some sections of the public. It seems, I think, to many of us, an unhealthy state of affairs. Do you have any suggestions as to how relations might be improved or how the unions might adjust their own practices?
Well, you know, I think that when you look at communities like we live in, probably that anger is much less than it is in larger urban and suburban communities. And part of the reason for that is we know one another, right? You see, you know, teachers, business people playing golf together. You see them going to the grocery store together. They're going to their place of worship together. They're doing all of the things in common. We know one another, and it's much more difficult to demonize people when you actually know them. Unfortunately, what we get in Congress, what we get in politics, what we get in the larger urban and suburban settings is the ability to demonize without really having to engage the other person to find out where they stand. Unfortunately, I don't have a solution that I could give you to say how to do that, but I think we have to change the conversation away from this negative view of whether it's teachers or whether it's unions or whether it's business people, to how are we all going to work together to move the economy and the neighborhood forward, if you will.
I'd like to move to economic development. Education is obviously relevant in many ways, but so is healthcare. And that's been a big topic and will continue to be a big topic in this election. I wonder if you'd like to explain your own position in relation to what we might as well call Obamacare. What do you think of it as it stands? What changes or improvements would you like to see made perhaps down the road?
Well, as you probably know, I voted in favor of the bill, and I have been asked this question 1 or 100 times.
Sure you have.
And my response is always the same. It's a good first step. We don't have anything out there other than the mantra of repeal and replace, without any substance to the replace part. Until somebody comes forward with something that, in my mind, offers specifics about how you would deal with the system, I'm inclined to keep going with the Affordable Care Act. My view is that it does create a pathway. It's going to be a slow pathway. It's not going to happen rapidly. You know, one of the complaints we get all the time is, well, my health care premiums went up this year, even though the Health Care Act was passed. Well, in fact, most of the provisions of the act don't go into effect until 2014. So if you go in and you actually look at what the insurance companies put into their applications for increases, what you will see is that about 2 or 3% of the increase is attributable to Obamacare, and the rest of it is other issues. We also hear a tremendous amount about, well, as I think Mr. Ryan said last night, he talked about the idea that if you let insurance companies have a place in the Medicare marketplace, you will reduce cost. The evidence does not support that. We've had insurance companies in the private healthcare market since its inception. It has not reduced cost. In fact, costs have gone in the opposite direction. So my view is we need to move forward with the bill. We need to implement it. And then we need to change it as we see things occurring through implementation. And we are going to find things that we're not going to like and that aren't going to work. And we just have to have the political and emotional maturity to make changes.
Right. What about the public option? Why wasn't it in the bill? Would you support it being in the bill? What are the arguments for or against?
For and against. Yeah, the public option clearly did not make it along the way because of the tremendous resistance which the bill imposed, or was imposed on the bill. I continue to look at the public option. I'm not convinced it would work in the United States at this point. That's my personal view. I think that we do get some benefit out of having a mixed marketplace.
Which would remain. I mean, with
the
public option, if it doesn't work, it doesn't work.
Well, I can understand us doing pilot programs in that arena. That may be a way to go forward. I've looked at a lot of other pilot programs as part of the Affordable Health Care Act. We're doing one now in the eastern part of the district, what's called the medical home. We're also doing, on a much broader basis, almost the entire district, a pilot program that attempts to limit the readmissions of people back into the hospital, which is a very high cost area. We need to be doing pilot programs to explore any number of options that are out there to see whether or not they work.
Right. Another controversial issue right now is the question of government subsidy to green energy. Been a lot of attacks on Obama for that, and Slender and so forth. So I'd like your response to that, but in the context of how we can generally promote economic development in the North Country while preserving the environment, the quality of life, the things that make us love the place.
Well, as you may know, we have a company here in the North Country, Kern Renewables, that does a pretty good integrated job. They are loggers and they are also a pellet maker. And they've done, I think, a good job of integrating the resource with a renewable energy source, which are the pellets. And they're trying to market those not only in the North Country but worldwide. The Weil Center uses a pellet-driven boiler, and we need to be looking at that. My view generally, sort of on energy, is it's got to be an all of the above approach. We need to be doing everything as we try and move away from fossil fuels. I was reading a story the other day that said if you had 100 square mile solar array in the Southwest, you could supply all of the electric energy needs in the United States.
Wow.
Now,
Yeah.
I don't know whether that's true, but I thought it was an interesting concept.
Mhm.
I am in favor, certainly as long as we continue to give tax breaks to the oil companies, I am in favor of equally funding for renewable and new energy programs.
Mhm.
I also think technology is going to develop dramatically over the next 10, 15 years. Things that are now not economically feasible may well be economically feasible in 5 or 10 years, whether that's solar, whether it's wind, whether it is other renewable sources. In terms of economic development for the North Country, certainly the renewable energy area is an area we need to focus on. My view is that we are more likely to see economic development in the North Country occurring from those companies that are located in Canada that want to expand into a larger marketplace. We've had great success with that over in the eastern side of the district, going back about 25 years. But if you just think of the geography of Canada, it's 3,000 miles across, there's 30 to 35 million people. If I'm sitting in Montreal and I want to access that market, I have a 24-hour drive minimally to distribute my product countrywide. I can go 6 or 8 hours into and through New York and reach the same number of people. So if I'm looking for expansion of my product, I think we're in a perfect position to help those companies expand here.
Mr. Wimmer, you had a question about the internet?
Yes, actually, I was wondering, to go along with improving the economy in the North Country, how you feel about internet access in the North Country. I'm not sure if you're aware, but there was recently a Forever Wired conference, which was dealing with expanding internet access in the North Country, and it's becoming almost modern-day equivalent of telephone or electricity access historically. So I was wondering what you thought about how we could improve this.
Well, I've been a big supporter of increasing broadband. I've worked with DANK in their projects, coming through really from Jefferson County through St. Lawrence County and east. We're now involved in a project where all the hospitals are being connected by a broadband infrastructure. There's a program down in Hamilton County where they're trying to install more current broadband, if you will. I believe that that's going to get funded by the state regional economic development councils. It's certainly one of their priorities. I think as you look at the necessity for broadband, it is like 100 years ago the necessity for roads. You absolutely have to have that infrastructure if people are going to be able to expand and grow their economy. So I'm fully supportive of that. Again, Chris Gibson and I voted to increase broadband funding in the Farm Bill for rural communities because we think it's that critical to the communities that we serve.
Now, one of the things that cybernetics and the internet and high-speed communication has revolutionized is the world of banking, with some dubious consequences in some cases. And Carl has a question about that.
I have a question on that. We're living right now in what's being called the Great Recession, as you know. It's widely agreed that the banking industry is inadequately regulated, too powerful, too complex to manage, and too involved in risky speculation and is steeped in an ethical vacuum. There are economists who say that if the structural problems in banking are not addressed, that another crisis is inevitable. What do you see as your role in doing something about this?
Well, I think that we need to recognize that there are 2 levels of banks, if you will. There are the community banks that service us. There are the money center banks and those that are investing as their primary source of revenue. They are not loaning money to people who then pay that money back. And so there's 2 levels there. I think we have to be very careful in over-regulating the community banks because they were not involved in really any of the speculative activity that occurred leading up to the recession. I think that we did not do a good job in Dodd-Frank, to be quite honest with you, because it does not manage the risk-taking activity. And really that is the center of this entire issue, is the ability to take risk with borrowed funds and with with funds provided by depositors. What we have to make sure of is that when we go forward, and the Basel Accords, I think, go further to accomplish that than actually Dodd-Frank does. I believe that what you need to be doing is making sure you're forcing the banks, the money center banks, to evaluate risk and then to increase capital in accordance with the level of risk. That, to me, is the direction I think we should be going.
To eliminate the moral hazard of too big to fail and the
Right.
promise of bailouts if you
And there were
go
some
south.
recent articles where we've had some fairly sophisticated and I would say conservative economists who are starting to talk about the idea that maybe you have to limit the size of the banks.
If I could just add to that, I heard John Bogle on NPR, you know, a Vanguard fame, et cetera, and he was saying that 99.2% of what's going on in Wall Street banking is speculative. And so I think that's a rather astonishing number in terms of, you know, as he called it, casino activity.
I think that is, I think that has always been there. I think it has geometrically progressed in the last 20 years. But I think the solution to that is, as you increase your level of risk, then you must increase your capital, so that you are in a position where if you do make a bad bet, like happened recently, that there is adequate capital to cover that without asking the taxpayers to do it.
The whole question of large amounts of money and the speculative use of large amounts of money leads us, of course, back to politics. I won't ask you personally, as you want to say something about it, is how much time you have to spend raising funds that could be better spent serving your constituents. But do you think that we should and could reduce the role of money in politics?
I do.
If so,
and I think that the way we should do that is we should have publicly funded campaigns. I signed on to that bill.
You stole my follow-up question.
I signed on to that bill as soon as I got to Congress. It was not reintroduced in the 112th because everybody knew it wasn't going to go anywhere. But that, to me, is a big part of the solution. We need to have publicly funded campaigns so that people like me are not out on a continuous basis raising money. And I think you would get more time devoted to the job, and you would have a shorter election cycle, which I think you all would be very appreciative of, after being flooded with commercials.
And a less vicious, toxic environment in
right.
terms of debate.
I agree, because we don't get down to talking about really the issues.
Bill, do you have any student perspective on how politics is perceived by people here?
Yeah, so one of the things that also is coming off of this is that a lot of students my age, my peer group, we're not really all that involved in the political process. So going off of your idea that you would like to have publicly funded campaigns, would you like to take that a step farther and perhaps make some sort of like mandatory voter registration? And I mean, maybe not mandatory voting, but maybe voter registration at least.
I certainly wouldn't be opposed to that. That does not seem to me to be a bad idea. I mean, that opportunity is given to you now in New York when you when you renew your driver's license. You have the ability to register at that point, and in fact change your party affiliation. That, to me, makes a great deal of sense.
Okay, excellent. Well, is there anything else you'd like to tell the voters?
I think the only thing I'd like to leave everybody with is that I hope that they take a look at my record, that they understand that what I perceive to be the most important thing as we go forward in the next Congress is the ability to have conversations that are based upon the facts, and that we step away from our ideologies and look to the issues that are facing us, and that we do it in a fact-based way rather than focused on ideology.
Okay, and we're out of time. So on behalf of the organizers, I'd like to thank you all for taking the time to talk with us and for your willingness to participate in our local civic media program. Please come back next week for another candid conversation. Until then, remember, our North Country matters.